Hello class and welcome to MSE 402 Project Management. My name is Dale Deerdorf. I'm your facilitator, instructor, and coach for all of the sessions we've got. You've got 6 different phases that we're going to walk you through in course lectures. And we're going to walk through all the components, all the pieces, the things that you need to think about or at least start to address in each one of these phases. First phase is going to be the introduction phase. And let's go ahead and just jump in and take a peek at what that introduction phase is going to be encompassing. So the introduction phase is going to encompass, from a PMI perspective, that first flow, that image that we've got over here from the initiating group, the planning group, the executing process group, the monitoring and control process group, and finally the closing group. But in our flow, remember, we add that first piece, which is the introduction phase, the pieces of the puzzle that fit into there. In addition to that, you can see the new PMBOK identifies a predictive life cycle. These are the anticipated things that will happen in a project, and those are some level of feasibility is done, then design, then we build, then we test, then we deploy, and then we close. And that's their flow. That's kind of how they show that flow. But for ours, remember, we've got 6 pieces that fit. Everything dovetails together, and I just want to show you how all of these pieces coordinate together. So in ours, we're going to cover best practices, project resumes, the team contract, the project proposal, and the project selection. All of that is done in the introduction phase. It isn't until you get into the initiating phase that you have an official project where you give it off to a project manager. We want you to understand the flow for all of these and how connected and interconnected they are, and how you may be working on multiple phases at the same time, and you may have to move forward and backward within different phases, depending on the changes that come into the project, in addition to the quality restrictions or quality constraints you may have. Let's go ahead and take a peek at that introduction phase and the introduction process group. The process group consists of those processes needed prior to the team initiation. The internal and external stakeholders need to formulate the preliminary information required to establish a project. That's done through a variety of different elements. So let's talk about the characteristics of a project, examples of a project, because in week 1 or in module 1, you're going to be in your discussions talking about what is a project, what isn't a project, what makes a project. So examples of project from a finance standpoint, bringing an exciting new investment tool to the public market. From a construction standpoint, building a new facility, biopharma or pharmaceutical, synthesizing a new medicine. From a government perspective, a project could be formulating a new agency. From a high technology perspective, merging 2 products into a single one or a single character. And then others might be fundraising, new gadget development. The list goes on and on and on. But we want you to know that project characteristics always start with a definite start and an end point. You have to have that. Once the end point is reached, the project is over and it is attempting to achieve something new. Remember that. Those are the characteristics of a project. Now, let's talk about the different types of project structures, because you can have many different types of structure depending on who your company wants to put in charge of the project and the structure of the project itself. If there is no PMO in place, then it becomes a very different ball game depending on the size of the company. So we have something that's referred to as a weak matrix. You have a strong matrix, you have a balanced matrix, you have a functional matrix, and you have a projectized / pure project. All 5 of those are typical project, I'll call it structures, that you're going to see in organizations. And each of them has a different or unique perspective to it. So let's take a peek at a weak matrix. What is a weak matrix? It's, within the weak matrix configuration, projects are much easier to do than any functional environment due to the benefits provided by the cross-functional teams. A cross-functional team is composed of individuals from many different backgrounds. sales, human resources, information technology. From an engineering perspective, they could have people from thermal, from vibe, from analysis, all the way into, your procurement people. Weak matrices should be used for projects in which cross-functional expertise is required, but the day-to-day work is still the priority. So it's that balance of the two. And then in a weak matrix, don't forget that functional managers still retain control of all of their project resources, since true project managers are not typically utilized. Project expenditures and coordinators are used within the weak matrix in order to accomplish the work of the project. Now, let's go ahead and jump into a strong matrix. So you had weak, now we're going to look at strong. So within a strong matrix organization, the project manager controls all of the resources rather than the functional manager. The PM is provided with a cross-functional team that is dedicated to the project. All of the matrix organizations, and this is usually the easiest one for the project manager to utilize in order to complete their projects. Remember that. This organization type is generally reserved for projects that are considerably more important than the day-to-day activities or work of the corporation. Okay? Now, we've gone from weak to strong. Now we're going to look at balance. So the balance matrix functions very similar to the weak, but within this matrix, the project manager shares power with the functional manager. They can do performance reviews together, they balance things out, they talk, they interact with each other, and they may hand things back and forth as far as people resources. Balanced matrices therefore work best when the project is equally important as the day-to-day work and the project requires cross-functional expertise. Now that's 3 of them. Now we're going to go into the 4th one, which is the functional matrix project. And this is one you're going to find it's very typical within high technology companies. A lot of those organizations, want to work within that functional matrix project. So within a functional matrix organization, workers report to a single supervisor. That single supervisor reports to a single manager, and the manager reports to a single person in senior management. It's a very hierarchical flow. You can see it in the illustration we have here. That is a typical hierarchical flow down. You have someone above, 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 above. It is not holistic. It is not broken apart where you are sharing any of that, not only leadership structure, but the organization. So it's specifically designed to run the day-to-day affairs, but lacks any infrastructure to accomplish projects. Within these organizations, projects tend to be possible if they can be accomplished within a single functional area without any outside assistance from outside departments. So you can see that the R&D department, their projects would be run by their project managers. They wouldn't need assistance or help from the other organizations. Now, this organization usually does not have a true project manager. While some individuals might hold that title, this organization will usually employ project coordinators or expediters in order to accomplish their projects. And many times you're going to find that you may be working as a project manager but not have the title. You may be working as a project manager and you could be working as a functional manager at the same time. There's this blending that happens, but true project managers have a PMO that they're assigned to that helps structure things. There's a variety of different flavors to project management. Now, the final piece we're going to talk about is that projectized pure matrix project. In a projectized pure matrix, it is entirely a different organizational form. In this type of organization, the project team is completed separate from the organization. They are a separate entity. The team is made up of a dedicated team that do not necessarily come from the parent organization. Therefore, many pure projectized teams consist primarily of contractors. You can have contractors, subcontractors, and if there is a functional manager, they have no power over the resources. This type of organization is usually primarily in an R&D area from a project standpoint, think tanks, or other intricate and large projects. This organization type is commonly used in automotive, biopharma, and aerospace environments. And as you can see, the choice of which organizational structure to use for any given project is really important. It sets the stage for how you're going to move forward, and it can easily influence the chances of your project's success. Now, leading versus managing, because in a project we have project managers and we have project leaders. As a project manager, believe me, I hate to say this, but you're going to have to wear both hats. It is going to be necessary for you to have both skills. You're going to need to have both leadership and management skills combined, and you're going to have to blend those together. So management is fundamentally about dealing with the day-to-day activities of an organization, while leadership is about preparing an organization for change while instilling a long-term vision. If we were looking at a painting, it's the difference between focusing on what we call the small brush strokes or looking at the bigger picture. Project managers adapt to ever-changing circumstances. Change is happening around them constantly, and they must be innovative and resourceful. They must deal with any deviations from the project plan, the changes that occur within the project scope, any changes that come in from stakeholders, resources available, missing or late procurements from suppliers, and any other unexpected disasters. All of these happen to project managers. On a project, at one point or another, you will experience every one of those things I just discussed. But good management is about bringing stability and order by smart planning, establishing procedures, monitoring, and controlling the execution of the project. So as I said, to accomplish all of these characteristics that we show in the flow over here, you need both management and leadership skills, and you need to be able to balance those. Now, let's talk about project leadership, because leadership is more about recognizing and communicating the need to significantly improve the direction and operation of the project. Vision, mission, purpose, goals, and objectives. How do we manage those? Project leadership is about taking strategy and driving it through into execution. They motivate stakeholders, team members, in order to work together in overcoming the challenges that are created by change, VUCA, and realizing previously unknown objectives. Those are the key elements, and we've got the 7 keys over here that we talk about for a leader. We want you to be authentic. You need to lead with vision. You have to improve and innovate, empower the team, get close to the stakeholders, both internal and external, establish a solid foundation, work with the intent, make sure people understand that, and finally, the last one is all the way back around to the first one. You must be authentic. People recognize when you're not. Now, there are different elements that you're going to see as we start to introduce a project and you start to pull it together. Now, there are formalized OBSs that you will have to pull together, but in the beginning of a project, one of the first things you need to think about is the organizational breakdown structure in the project's org chart. The OBS gives you the opportunity to illustrate the reporting relationships of a project, and it's similar to the org chart for a functional organization, but it gives you that ability to understand that. Who reports to who? What is the relationship? Those are very, very important. Now, in addition to the project OBS, you've got the project RAM. The responsibility assignment matrix, that needs to start being formulated in the beginning of the project. You lay the RAM out, and the responsibility assignment matrix shows who is going to be responsible for doing what work. So we break down the work into those work breakdown structures, and then we say who would be doing that. And that who could be referred to as just, testing, manufacturing, procurement, engineering. It could be broken down that way, and you can go even deeper and you can have responsibility assignment matrices that have people's names associated with it that they anticipate would be working in those areas. The RACI is the responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. It's more of an advanced version of what we had before and what we were just talking about. This is where we break down each one of those tasks that you had in the WBS down to tasks and subtasks, and we put a name next to who is going to be working on what and what their responsibility is going to be. Are they accountable for it? Are they just from a consultation going to be working within that area? Are they I for informed? So RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. A RACI chart gives you the ability to take that OBS down into the RAM down another level to understand the entire flow down to a people person. Now you can also take this RACI, and the RACI can be, I'll call it resource loaded against your Microsoft project schedule or a scheduling tool, and you can actually understand the cost of each person for each task, depending on how you blend that and put that together. Now, let's talk about effective project managers, because there's a core set of skills and traits that successful project managers have. And you'll see that those are systems thinking. There's a high level of integrity, proactivity, there's a business perspective, communication, time management, diplomacy, optimism. The most important of all of these skills, in my perspective, I think is going to be communication. I think communication drives everything. You can't plan the plan without understanding it from a communication standpoint. You can't have time management laid out correctly unless you, from a communication standpoint, have talked to people. You can't understand the system, the subsystem, and the super system, along with the system thinking within the organization, the connections and the interconnections, without communication. So for me, I would tell you that the more in tune you are with your communication skills, the more polished you can become, the better you will become at being an effective project manager. Now, as your project starts to take off, there's typically a Tuckman's 5-stage model that happens, and this is almost identical on every team or every project as you move forward, with the exception of a situation where a team is still intact and has been pulled over to work on another project. Then some of the, I'll call it the storming portion of it, and the forming portion of it are accelerated. That happens in a much smaller window, but typically the forming section is where groups get acquainted. It's that Cinderella period where people start to understand who's who that's coming on the project, what their skill sets might be, things like that. Step 2, the storming section, is where group members express their individuality while resisting the constraints of the project. This is where we actually start to argue. We have a certain level of chaos that happens. Your team members start to understand that they're part of a bigger thing, but at the same time, there's a push and pull here, the dynamics of people trying to work together. When we get into stage 3, the norming stage, this is where we actually start to work together. This is, where we start to create close relationships. They begin to develop, and the group begins to gain this cohesiveness. There's a battle rhythm that starts to happen, and that flows into performing. The performing stage is where that battle rhythm is moving along. It's like that locomotive going down the track, and you can hear it moving step by step by step by step. That is that performing. This stage sees the project team concept in place. Everything is starting to fit together. The members have shifted their individuality into focusing on accomplishing the project's goals, not necessarily their individual goals. They are working together. Adjourning is the end of that process, and that's where we then hand people back, or they go off, they're disbanded, or they move to another project. That's the typical structure that you see within the Tuckman's 5-stage model. And many times you'll find that adjourning is not part of it. They'll talk forming, norming, storming, and performing. Adjourning is not part of it, but in this model, the 5-stage model, it is there. Now, in addition to that, let's talk about 5-stage team development. So the 5-stage team development process has 3 major implications for a project manager. So these are the 4 that we talked about with adjourning, okay? But the project manager should help the group get the performing stage up and running as quickly as possible. That is what the primary, the project manager is responsible for the effectiveness and the efficiency of the project, of the people, of the resources. That is one of their tasks. The group members should understand the development process, and that'll help reduce the tensions getting to the performing stage. And then finally, the norming stage should be emphasized. That is where we're trying to get to. That is ultimately where we want everyone to be working in, because that's where the relationships are formed. And that plays a significant role on that effectiveness and efficiency of the productivity gained in the performing phase. Now, some studies, according to this, have shown that this model only applies to individuals and teams who have not previously worked together. So when we start talking about high-performing teams, that could be a different formula, and we'll talk about that later. Now, there's another model called the punctuated equilibrium model, and it shows the formation of the team at the beginning of the project. And you can basically say, using this model, that little progress can be expected to be made early in the project, since the team members are likely they're still working on other projects that may have higher priority, and at some point during the project, it'll reach a tripping point. When that happens, the team members realize the deadline is rapidly approaching. I either have a milestone or I have some level of review that has to happen. And as soon as that happens, everything keeps shifting, and there's a rapidly, we increase everything in an attempt to help the success of the project. It's much like the final quarter of a football game. Both teams change their game plans, beginning to use more desperate plays that they would never have considered in the first half, but in the second half, to win the game, they're willing to go there. So remember that. This is called the punctuated equilibrium model. It anticipates that you're not going to be as effective or efficient in what we show here as phase 1 versus phase 2 as you're trying to get closer to completion. Now, previously I was talking about high-performing teams, so let's just talk about that for a second. Those type of work teams, because this is the most optimal formula for you if you can get your team functioning in this environment. Building a high-performing team requires you to recruit team members who are expert problem solvers. They're credible and have high energy. You need to conduct meetings. Meetings start on time, end on time. They're focused. Everybody participates. There's collaboration, and they're cleanly run. Many a times there is a facilitator who actually conducts the meeting. They create a shared vision for the group that captures the otherwise intangible aspects of the project, and that'll help develop the image of what the team wants to create. It's an image more powerful than themselves. And establishing a team identity, which will create a concrete image for what the team should be. I have always allowed the teams to create a team name, a unique name, an identifier for them that gives them the ability to kind of resonate around what that's going to be. And it can be anything. You could be Team Sharks. You could be Team Alpha. You could be whatever that team wants to call themselves, but give them the opportunity to kind of pull that together. Now, finally, high-performing work teams have a flow. So when we build them, there's a variety of things that make things tough. One of them is managing the reward systems in the project to encounter better team efforts and performance. Many times there are team members that do not want to be pulled out and recognized for their performance. It's actually an anti-motivator doing that. Well, others love the pat on the back. They need that. They've got to have those strokes so they keep up their performance. So you need to find a way to balance that. You're going to need to find a way to orchestrate the decision-making process, because that'll allow better decisions to be made by the individual team members and the team as a whole in an expedient manner. Now, don't forget that when we're working with consensus takes longer to create a decision than it does with the other methods. So you have to accommodate that. And managing the natural conflicts within the project team. You have to establish clear roles and responsibilities. People need to be held accountable for what they're working on, and they need to be able to deliver what they say they can do. Now, don't forget, you've got leading sessions devoted to team building that improve the team's effectiveness. Team building exercises should improve the team's culture, behavior, and performance. They may not want to do these, but they do work, so don't forget that. Don't ignore the fact that just having the opportunity to pull everybody together to work on a specific team building exercise gives a chance for everyone to see that they can actually work together. Now, conflicts are going to happen. It's inevitable, and you're going to have to find a way to manage those conflicts. So in the world of project manager, there are many techniques an effective project manager can use in order to mitigate the conflicts within the project. This is a list that I've created that I think is valuable for you. Well, the lists vary from study to study or from person to person, but I think that if you create a list similar to this, it gives you an idea of what potential conflicts you should be looking for. Priorities. If we have alternating priorities, resources, if I don't have enough people at the right time, at the right place to get the right thing done. Schedule. If the schedule is too aggressive, if it can't be achieved, that will basically take people and put them in a position where there is a conflict. Potentially policies and procedures. In addition to that, SMEs with technical opinions. The costs, and then conflicts of personality, where some people are just not team-based people. They prefer to work individually, and they just don't work well with others. Those are the elements that you're going to see from a managing conflict standpoint. Now, there's an additional, I'll call it 6 different techniques that you can use that'll help you, facilitate problem solving, foster diplomacy between your team members. And one of those, number 1, is going to be confrontation and problem solving. It requires you to find the root cause and issue and resolve it immediately. Don't let it fester, don't let it stew for a while. Get in and work on the confrontation. Collaboration. It'll allow the team to reach a consensus so they can solve the issue together. Number 3, compromise. You have to find a way to get to go, is the best way to put it. Compromise will involve 2 or more parties in a conflict to give up something in their negotiation in an attempt to resolve the conflict. I need to have you agree to disagree, but at the same time say, I can live with that. I can move forward with that. I'm okay with that. I am not going to, stop completely and say, no, I can't work in this environment or with that. So those are the first 3. The next one, smoothing. Smoothing is a technique that focuses on the positives between the parties that are conflicted and attempts to de-emphasize the source of the conflict. The common ground should act as a means of conflict resolution. Both of you are working in a great organization. Both of you are working on a great team. I know we butt heads at different times, but the overall goal is always achievable. How do we make that happen? That is smoothing. Withdrawal. Sometimes you just can't resolve it, and you have to remove a person. They've got to be either pulled off the team, they need to be reassigned to something, they may be able to come back later, but it needs to be understood that they had to be removed for us to be able to move forward. And then finally, the last technique is forcing. It's the opposite of smoothing. It is my way or the highway. It's the method in which the project manager simply takes their own opinion of the situation and asserts that this is the way it is going to be. Yea, verily, I know you may not like it, but this is what we have to do. This is what we're told we're going to do. Those are the techniques, those 6 additional techniques. Now, in closing, what I want to do is I want to clarify certain questions. Why should the project even be launched? You need to be able to ask yourself that why. Should we actually be in a project? You need to be able to explain to not only the team members, but to yourself why this project should be launched. Because if it shouldn't, you need to go to the PMO, you need to go to other project managers, you need to go to senior leadership, and you should tell them, we should not be launching this program or this project, and this is why. The next piece, you must understand what are the risks and potential obstacles to getting that project started, to getting it down the road. You need to know what the known knowns need to be documented. You've got to understand that. The unknown unknowns, we have no visibility to, but the known risks that you can pick up by looking at best practices, lessons learned, talking to SMEs that have done things similar, gives you insight into where you have potential obstacles. The next piece of it is who will be responsible for what? Who? I always put together task, process flows, and in that process flow, every element has got a box. And that box I should be able to point to, and I'll take the overall whole schedule and I'll say, I'm responsible for this whole activity. You're responsible for that element of it right there. You're responsible for that element of it there. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that? Make sure you've got an agreement with the who will be responsible for what. The next piece of it is where are the funds coming from? Because many times we'll start on a project and it'll be like, oh, we never got funding for that, so I need you guys to go away, or that this shouldn't be running. Make sure you go back and say, where are the funds coming from? How much money do we have? How much do I have for project reserve? How much do I have for program management? What are the limitations? Is there a funding profile where I can't burn the money in the front, but I can burn it deeper in the back? What are the constraints? You've got to understand the funding on your project and where it comes from. And then the last piece of it is, when should each milestone be reached? You've got to have a credible plan. It's got to flow into a credible schedule. You have to establish on and off ramps for plan A's, plan B's, plan C's, because VUCA, change, chaos, all of this is going to happen to you. You've got to have a plan that on a daily basis you can move forward. And that plan has got to be not only worked on by the team, it's got to be agreed on by the team as to this would be the direction for where we're going. So whenever working on a project, try to reduce this improvision to a minimum. Follow these 5 steps and always ask yourself the 5 WH questions. That's my lecture for this week. This is Module 1's lecture. Let me know if you've got any questions on any of these materials as we move forward. I look forward to talking to you in our live interactions. Have a great week. Bye-bye.